The wedding venue overlooked the coastline of Santa Barbara, bathed in golden afternoon light that made everything look flawless from a distance. White chairs were lined up in perfect rows. Fresh flowers filled the air with a sweet, expensive scent. Guests arrived in tailored suits and elegant dresses, smiling for phones and social media, convinced they were about to witness a perfect love story. Inside the bridal suite, Claire Whitman stood in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting the lace on her wedding gown with trembling fingers. She looked stunning. Everyone told her so, but her reflection didn't calm her. Claire was 29, white, successful, and used to being in control. She had planned this wedding down to the smallest detail: the venue, the lighting, the guest list, even the timing of the sunset photos. Perfection wasn't just a preference for her, it was a shield. Behind her, bridesmaids whispered nervously. "He's late," one of them murmured. Claire's jaw tightened. "I said I wanted the photographer here by noon." Another bridesmaid checked her phone. The assistant said he had car trouble. Claire exhaled sharply. Unacceptable. At that moment, a quiet knock came at the door. A man stepped in, holding a camera bag close to his chest. His name was Ethan Brooks. He was in his mid-30s, dressed simply, dark slacks, button-up shirt slightly wrinkled, shoes worn, but clean. His hair was messy, his eyes tired, as if the day had already asked too much of him. "I'm sorry I'm late," Ethan said gently. "My car." Claire cut him off. "I don't care," she said flatly. "You were hired for today. Today only happens once." Ethan nodded. "I understand. If you give me a moment, I can still—" She looked him up and down, taking in the lack of polish, the absence of confidence she expected from someone she'd trusted with capturing her most important day. "Is this your first big wedding?" she asked. "No," Ethan replied calmly. "But I don't usually—" Claire turned to her planner. "I don't want him." The room went silent. Ethan froze. "Excuse me?" "I said I don't want him photographing my wedding," Claire repeated, her voice cool and precise. "Find someone else. Someone more professional." The planner hesitated. "Claire, he came highly recommended, and it's too late to replace—" "I'm not compromising," Claire snapped. "This day matters too much." Ethan swallowed. He had heard rejection before, but never like this. Never in a room full of people watching him become a problem to be removed. "I can leave," he said quietly. Claire didn't respond. He turned and walked out, camera bag heavy against his shoulder, every step echoing down the hallway. Outside, the ocean breeze felt colder. Ethan sat on a low stone wall, staring at the venue doors. Photography wasn't just his job, it was how he made sense of people, of moments, of truth that words often hid. Inside the venue, the wedding went on without him. Claire smiled for the hired backup photographer, but the smiles were tight. Forced. Her fiancé, Daniel, noticed. "You okay?" he whispered. "Fine," she said too quickly. The ceremony began. Vows were exchanged. Applause followed. But something was missing. Neither Claire nor Daniel knew it yet, but the man she had just refused was the only one who would notice the cracks forming beneath the surface of their perfect day. And months later, when those cracks threatened to destroy everything they had built, it would be Ethan's photographs, the ones she never wanted taken, that would show them the truth they had been avoiding. Because sometimes the images we reject are the ones that save us. Ethan didn't go far after leaving the venue. He walked down the gravel path that led toward the cliffs, the sound of the ocean growing louder with every step. Guests laughed behind him. Glasses clinked. Music drifted through the open doors. Light, celebratory, untouched by what had just happened. He sat on a wooden bench overlooking the water and placed his camera bag at his feet. For a long moment, he didn't open it. Rejection wasn't new to Ethan. He had lost jobs before, lost opportunities. But this felt different. It wasn't about skill. It was about perception. about not fitting the image someone wanted for their perfect story. He finally unzipped the bag and took out his camera, running his thumb gently over the worn grip. This camera had followed him through funerals, births, quiet reconciliations, and moments of love people didn't know they were revealing. Inside the venue, things were unfolding exactly as Claire had planned. On the surface. Daniel stood with his groomsmen, laughing a little too loudly. He kept adjusting his cufflinks, glancing toward the aisle more often than necessary. He loved Claire. That much was real. But something in his chest felt tight, like a question he hadn't asked himself yet. When Claire walked down the aisle, everyone gasped. She was radiant. But Ethan, watching from a distance through instinct alone, would have noticed the way her smile reached her mouth but not her eyes. He would have noticed how her hand trembled when Daniel took it, how she inhaled sharply before saying her vows, like someone bracing for impact instead of stepping into joy. The backup photographer captured every pose perfectly, straight backs, chins lifted, smiles on command. But moments slipped through unseen. After the ceremony, guests spilled into the reception area. Champagne flowed. The sun dipped lower, bathing everything in gold. Claire moved from group to group, laughing, posing, performing the role she had rehearsed. Daniel watched her from across the lawn. "You don't seem happy," he said quietly when they finally stood alone. "I am happy," Claire replied instantly. "You don't sound like it." She frowned. "Can we not do this today?" Daniel nodded, but the words stayed with him. Meanwhile, Ethan remained outside the gates, preparing to leave. He slung the camera bag over his shoulder and headed toward the parking area. Then he stopped. Through the open doors, he saw something no one else was paying attention to. Claire stood near the edge of the reception, arguing in low voices with her mother. Her posture was rigid, her jaw tight. Daniel approached, placed a hand on her arm, and she pulled away. It wasn't dramatic, it was real. Ethan raised his camera without thinking. One click, not staged, not posed, just truth. Claire looked up at that exact moment, her eyes catching his through the crowd. For a split second, her expression dropped. The control, the polish, the perfection, all gone. And Ethan captured it. She didn't yell, she didn't wave him away, she just stared. Then a guest stepped between them and the moment passed. Ethan lowered the camera, heart pounding. He knew he shouldn't be taking photos. He knew he'd been dismissed, but instinct told him something important was happening, something the curated version of this day would erase. He turned and walked away. Weeks later, when the honeymoon glow faded and arguments replaced smiles, Claire would remember that look, the one she never meant anyone to see. And the photograph she never knew existed would become the mirror she couldn't avoid, the one that would force her and Daniel to confront what their perfect wedding had hidden. Because the most powerful images are rarely the ones we plan for. They're the ones that catch us when we stop pretending. 3 months after the wedding, the house felt quieter than it should have. Claire noticed it first in the mornings, the way Daniel moved around the kitchen without speaking, the way conversations stayed practical, schedules, groceries, bills, never drifting into feelings, never touching the tension that lived just beneath the surface. They hadn't fought, not really, but they hadn't connected either. At night, Daniel often stayed up later than Claire, scrolling through his phone, pretending to watch videos while his mind replayed small moments from the wedding day. The stiffness in her smile, the way she had pulled away from his touch, the sentence she had stopped herself from saying more than once since then. Claire, for her part, threw herself into work. Meetings, emails, projects that rewarded control and punished vulnerability. She told herself this was normal. Adjustment took time. Marriage wasn't a movie. Still, something felt wrong. One evening, Daniel came home holding a small envelope. "This came for you," he said, setting it on the counter. Claire glanced at it. No return address, just her name, handwritten. She frowned. "Did you open it?" "No." She hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a single printed photograph. Her breath caught. It was from the wedding, not a posed portrait, not a smiling group shot. It was her, standing near the reception doors, mid-argument, her face unguarded. Fear, frustration, doubt written clearly in her eyes. Daniel stood just out of frame, his hand reaching for her arm, frozen in hesitation. Claire sank into a chair. Daniel stared at the image. "I've never seen you look like that." Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "Neither have I." At the bottom of the photo was a small card. Some moments matter more than perfection. Ethan Brooks. Daniel looked up. "The photographer you fired." Claire nodded, shame rising fast and hot. "There's more," Daniel said quietly. He pulled out his phone and opened an email thread. "He sent me a message last week, asked if we were doing okay. I didn't know what to say." Claire covered her mouth with her hand. "Why would he?" "Because he saw something," Daniel replied. "Something we didn't want to." The room fell silent. Claire stared at the photo again. She remembered that moment clearly now. The pressure, the fear that she was stepping into a life she had planned perfectly but hadn't fully questioned. "I wasn't ready," she said finally. "I wanted to be, but I was scared, and instead of saying it, I tried to control everything." Daniel sat across from her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know how," she admitted. "I thought if I admitted doubt, everything would fall apart." Daniel nodded slowly. "Instead, it did anyway." They sat there for a long time, the photograph between them like a truth neither could ignore. The next day, Claire emailed Ethan. "I owe you an apology, and maybe a conversation." Ethan replied within an hour. "I never wanted to cause harm, only honesty. If you're willing to talk, so am I." A week later, they met at a quiet cafe overlooking the ocean. Ethan looked the same. Simple clothes, calm eyes, camera nowhere in sight. "I shouldn't have taken the photo," Claire said immediately. "But I'm glad you did." Ethan nodded. "I take photos because people forget what they felt, not to hurt them." Daniel leaned forward. "You saw our marriage breaking before it even started." "I saw two people afraid to disappoint each other," Ethan replied gently. "That's not failure, that's silence." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Can we fix it?" Ethan smiled softly. "That's not my job, but sometimes seeing the truth is the first repair." When Claire and Daniel left the cafe, they didn't hold hands right away. But for the first time since the wedding, they talked, honestly, clumsily, without polish. And the photograph Claire had once feared became something else entirely, not a reminder of rejection, but a starting point. Because the man she had refused didn't just capture an image, he captured the moment their marriage stopped pretending, and finally had a chance to survive. The weeks after that conversation were uncomfortable and necessary. Claire and Daniel started therapy, not because things were falling apart, but because they finally admitted they had never really slowed down enough to ask the hard questions. Sessions were quiet at first, long pauses, half-finished sentences. Claire struggled the most. Control had always been her armour, and taking it off felt like standing in the cold. Daniel, on the other hand, surprised her. He talked about how small he had felt at the wedding, how he loved Claire deeply, but often felt like he was being fitted into a role rather than invited into a life. How he had been afraid to challenge her perfection because he didn't want to be another disappointment. Claire listened, truly listened, for the first time. "I thought if everything looked right," she said one night after a session, "then it would feel right." Daniel shook his head gently. "I don't need perfect, I need real." Those words stayed with her. One evening, Claire opened the folder Ethan had shared with them online. More photos from the wedding, not the polished ones, the in-between moments. Her father's nervous smile before walking her down the aisle, Daniel exhaling deeply when he thought no one was watching. Her own hands clenched tightly around her bouquet. She saw herself clearly now, not as a bride, as a person who was terrified of failing at love. She emailed Ethan again. "I see it now, all of it. Thank you for not turning away." He replied later that night. "Truth is patient. It waits until we're ready." As Claire and Daniel worked through their marriage, something else shifted too: how Claire treated people. She noticed how often she had equated professionalism with polish, worth with presentation. How quickly she had dismissed Ethan because he didn't fit the image she had built in her head. She began apologizing more, listening more, letting go. Months passed. One afternoon, Daniel came home with an idea. "What if we redo the photos?" he said. Claire frowned. "The wedding?" "No," he said. "Us, now, no guests, no performance, just us being honest." They called Ethan. This time, Claire's voice was steady. "If you're willing," she said, "we'd like you to photograph us again, on our terms, on yours." Ethan paused, then smiled. "I'd be honoured." They met at the same coastline where the wedding had taken place, but this time there were no chairs, no schedule, no pressure, just wind, waves, and two people learning how to stand beside each other without pretending. Ethan didn't pose them. He waited. Claire laughed, a real laugh. Daniel reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. They argued briefly about nothing important, and then kissed, unplanned, unpolished. Click, click, click. Claire felt lighter with every shutter sound. She finally understood that Ethan hadn't been trying to capture a perfect day. He had been trying to save a true one. And this time, she didn't turn away from the lens. A year after the wedding, Claire stood once again by the ocean. But this time, she wasn't holding a bouquet or worrying about how the wind moved her hair. She was holding a framed photograph. The image showed her and Daniel sitting barefoot in the sand, knees pulled close, foreheads touching. No smiles for the camera, no performance. Just two people choosing each other in a quiet, unmistakable way. That photograph hung in their living room now, not the wedding portraits, not the posed perfection. This one. Their marriage wasn't perfect. They argued sometimes. They still learned, still misstepped. But they talked, openly, honestly, and that changed everything. When fear showed up, they named it. When control crept in, Claire noticed it and let go before it could do damage. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Daniel nodded toward the photo. "That picture," he said, "that's when I knew we were going to be okay." Claire smiled softly. "Me too." Across town, Ethan prepared an exhibition in a small local gallery. The collection wasn't about weddings or romance. It was called Between Moments. Photographs of people caught in truth, grief, doubt, reconciliation, courage, the kind of moments most people tried to hide. Claire and Daniel attended the opening quietly, standing near the back. One photograph stopped Claire in her tracks. It was her, the same image that had arrived in the envelope months ago, the one she had once been ashamed of. Now it hung on the wall, framed simply, respectfully. The caption beneath it read, "A beginning, not an ending." Claire felt Daniel's hand slip into hers. After the crowd thinned, Claire approached Ethan. "I used to think you ruined my wedding," she said gently. Ethan smiled. "I was afraid I had." "But you saved our marriage," she continued, "by showing us who we were before we knew how to say it." Ethan shook his head. "I didn't save anything. You chose to look." Claire nodded. "That choice changed everything." As they left the gallery, Daniel glanced back at the photographs one last time. "Funny," he said. "The day was supposed to be about love." Claire squeezed his hand. "It was. We just didn't know what kind yet." And somewhere between the image she once rejected and the truth she finally embraced, Claire learned the lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. Perfection fades. Honesty endures. And Sometimes, the person we push away is the one who shows us how to stay.